Welcome back to Music Fastball. We've got the second in our two-part series with Cliff Fluet this week. Last time, Cliff, we were talking about the importance of sellers being well educated when they come to sell their catalog, their portfolio, the body of work that they've accrued through the years, and how important that is for them, making sure that they get the right value for all of the effort they've put in. Now, this week, Cliff, we're going to be talking a bit more practical about how to systemize the process, how we can advise people who are buying those catalogs to prepare a process that will allow them to get through more of these deals, both obviously the ones that transact and the ones that don't. So let's start here, shall we? There is sometimes cynicism about lawyers being included in deals. Is that fair or unfair?
Well, I'm not going to say it's unfair. And look, some of it is earned. Let's be honest. And the truth is, different firms have different models, different incentives produce different behaviors. Some lawyers benefit from complexity, from deals that take longer. I know there's an inherent suspicion about any business that charging time rather than satisfaction. Look, I've seen it, you've seen it, but this is what I believe, and this is how we've built our practice. We think that deals die from delay. Momentum is the deal killer. Efficiency is in absolutely everyone's interest. The faster you get to certainty, the more deals close. The more deals close, the more relationships you build, and frankly, the more value that you create. So I'm a big fan in saying complexity doesn't serve clients, it's clarity. So look, it's not universally fair either. We do need to do a lot of the work. A lot of it hasn't been done, and the front loading is what really makes it longer. So, the way I've built the practice is that we absolutely don't like to monetize complexity. We embrace the sophistication and get the deals done.
And I think that's really important as well, particularly more and more we hear about the lower end of the market being very active, which means there's a higher volume, potentially lower value per transaction. And if those funds are doing those types of deals don't have a repeatable process, the overhead of doing them is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, and most importantly, unexpected because they haven't done that pre-work. They get the bill shock, or they blame the lawyers, or again, it erodes trust.
Yeah, and just from a deployment of capital point of view, if you're going to spend a significant amount of time on every single deal and every single one is white gloved, unless you're buying huge catalogs for massive sums of money, you're just never going to get it deployed. So you really have to have a machine set up to do it, don't you?
You don't, but what I'm really big on is front loading work. And if you can do the legal work early, or even not to the same degree, not necessarily a white glove, maybe a builder's glove, but you do that stuff up front. If you can do some hard work before anyone's fallen in love with a number, we think it can really help. We're doing for a lot of clients now, we're doing a investment committee review. So these will be short, structured legal assessments that happen before the modeling, before the LOI, before any commercial commitment. And that allows the people deciding at the investment committee what the big issues are. So you can think about those titles and encumbrances and missing documents long before they become deal breakers or become these horrible surprises. The work's going to have to get done either way, whether you do it on your terms when you've got leverage or late when you're firefighting. So we really believe that if you work early, you get the options, and when you get late, you don't. The work is the same, but the leverage just isn't.
Yeah, and I think historically, this has always felt legal diligence has felt like a pretty bespoke approach, pretty bespoke practice. How much room do you think there is to actually standardize it?
Well, look, the thing that, we talk about music being an asset class and things like that, but it's a genuine non-fungible asset class. Every deal is different. I had one, new colleague who is new to the industry come to me and says, it's almost like someone spent weeks or months negotiating this document. Yes, that's exactly right. Every asset is different, every catalog is different, every artist's story is different. These contracts, they're complicated, sophisticated, idiosyncratic, but the process doesn't have to always be bespoke. The questions you're asking are largely the same. The documents you need are largely the same. The issues that kill deals are largely the same. So the way we approach it is that we standardize the intake, the artifacts, the gates, the workflow, and then you preserve the judgment for things that actually require it. For one client, we have a bronze, silver, gold approach where they ask us what kind of pre-deal assessment they'd like us to do. And that's how we think you can scale without losing the quality. There's always an element of senior judgment. There's always an eye of someone who's done these deals for many, many years, in my case, decades. But what we try and do is standardize it and systematize it.
Yeah, and again, I think that that's so important, right? If you've got 20 deals to look at in a given month, then you're going to have to decide which ones you're going to invest the time in, which ones you're going to, plan to do diligence on, give them a probability of success before getting right into the details and investing a lot of time, effort, and money going deep into every single one. I think makes total sense. And what about when, these things are skipped? Where do they fall apart?
It's when that pre-assessment hasn't been done, and unfortunately, it's boringly predictable. There's rights issues that are found too late, long after the LOI, or when the exclusivity is just about to run out, or sometimes after the investment committee is approved in principle, and by then you're not negotiating, you really are firefighting. So as we've discussed before, sellers that aren't ready, no idea where the documents are, who owns the legal position. Every question takes a week, and you get this internal chaos on both sides, and everything goes through email and a bunch of heroics. There's no muscle memory, there's no templates, and you finish a transaction, and 6 months later, you find yourself starting from scratch. And I
Back
think
in
the
the same
sad
flow,
truth,
yeah.
these deals don't go down in flames. They often just take so long that people lose the will to live. So really, the
Yeah.
question is prepare, prepare, prepare.
Yeah, and we talk about kind of deal fatigue, and that's okay if you're the one person selling, but if you're acquiring many catalogs, then you really want to make sure that you've got something in place that isn't going to drain you every single time because you just lose the appetite to keep going. And I think, a lot of times, given there's two parties, there's a bit of finger pointing that goes on. Oh, it's slow because of X, Y, and Z. Is that tend to be internal or external through your experience?
The honest answer is that most of it's internal, but on both sides.
Right.
There's unclear threshold, there's unclear ownership. There's no one empowered enough to say, look, this is good enough, let's move. And that's on both sides. But the reason for that is because if you don't know what ready looks like, you can't ever get there. You keep circling, you keep asking the same questions, you keep waiting for permission, you keep waiting for someone to say it's okay. And that's why one of the things we think is by having standardizations, by having deal matrices, it gives people a framework for decision making. It gives them position to move either way. And half of the deal delay is looking for someone to decide what they already know, but what they need is the
Yeah.
confidence to do that.
Yeah. And there are some examples out there of people doing a really good job. Obviously there's always room for improvement, but those people who have industrialized the process, like what are they doing differently?
Look, they've got standard positions with standard artifacts. They understand their go, their no go. They've got NDAs with teeth. They've got LOIs that actually say something, have a range of prices and a range of outcomes, allowing people to find somewhere to land. They've got encumbrance registers. They're thinking about consent triggers. They've got issues logs. You're just not reinventing it every single time. And what's really important is clear ownership. You get a deal lead, a proper virtual data room. You've got something that means that if something's ready to go or ready to model or ready to build or secondary ready. And again, back to these playbooks, seller readiness, where they know what's coming. Everyone's speaking the same language. And that's what muscle memory looks like. That's what scales. So the funds that close, they're just not smarter. They're more systematic and they start earlier.
Yeah, and I mean that makes obvious sense, right? Like any process, the more you do it, the better you become. You know, the better you become. The more you stand out in the marketplace. I think obviously we look at this all the time from a technology standpoint, whether it be the legal process or any other process, indeed inside one of these funds. But I think technology now specifically really is bringing significant advantages. Where have you seen it well applied?
Well, look, I mean, I've got some clients with some very whizzy valuation technology, and we use technology, proper technology, to handle the first suite for document extraction, for rights mapping, for gap analysis, stuff that used to take junior lawyers ages. We
Yeah.
do it with the right tools and teams. And then what it does is it frees up senior people who've got decades of pattern recognition to focus on the puzzles, the real brainers, as the French client of mine called them. That's not a no-brainer. The
Yeah,
judgment
yeah, of
call, the
course,
things
yeah.
that require expertise. And we're not replacing lawyers with machines. We're deploying lawyers where they add the most value. And that's really about making legal not more expensive but making it more efficient.
And I think, there's push and pull factors within that, aren't there? You have to design a process that feels like it's significantly advantageous to the fund, because otherwise, if it's extremely cumbersome, they just won't do it. And actually, technology is a massive bridge to that, isn't it? Being able to get done a lot of the basic stuff, a lot of the table stake stuff. So you can justify paying, the money for your lawyers so they can bring in the expertise. They can really look at the nuances of where they need to without having to charge an absolute fortune for kind of doing what now should be at least relatively repeatable. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think that's fair, but they've got to be specialists.
Yeah.
It's got to be lawyers who really understand the asset class. And none of the people that we're acting for, they're corporate lawyers, they're fund lawyers. They're fantastic and they're great and they do the things that they're great at. But understanding this asset class, not so much. So really, it's about working with the experts, not just a lawyer.
And Cliff, I think, as you very well rightly schooled me on, that music is not complex, but it is sophisticated. And having people on your team who understand the sophistication is wildly important in any asset class. But I think from the experience we've had with this one, very particularly with this one, there are lots and lots of challenges along the way. And I
Yeah,
think that
challenges.
that kind of
Sorry.
leads on to the change in the way that people are financing these assets and the requirement of those different financing methods and the rigor that they require. Uh, what do you think changes day one, depending on how you're looking to finance a given asset?
Well, look, now we've got different buyers. If it's a big label, you're not necessarily looking to sell it or finance it in another way. But for institutional investors and funds and VCs and other people that are in the place as well, you're going to want to do something with that asset. So you have to bake in those secondary standards from the start. If you ever want to lever the catalog or securitize it or bring in a partner, their standards are going to be higher. Secondary buyers, lenders, securitization desks, they're more demanding than most primary buyers. So my view is you just don't meet the minimum for this transaction. You've got to meet the standard for the next one. It's not that much more work, but it keeps your options open. So it's really, really important to do that. And of course, we've got brilliant insurers out there in the market looking at contingent risk or warranties and indemnities. They're very useful tools and help transfer some of the risk, but they're not a substitute for doing the work. The underwriters ask the same questions as the lawyers do, and we have for some underwriters and insurers as well.
I think, that's a really important point there, Cliff. Buying a catalog as a point in time acquisition is one thing, but there's a lot, if not all, of the funds that we've spoken to. There is a bigger brother, there's a hierarchy. And in many of the strategies that we come across, people are acquiring these assets to aggregate them to create greater value in the whole, but in preparation to sell it on to somebody else with bigger budgets, more capital. And actually thinking about that day one is so critical, because it's kind of nuanced, right? You have to leave something on the table so they have some value to extract in the future if you're going to hand over a catalog, or a portfolio which is absolutely all pip squeezed. There's not a lot for the next person. And but you also have to make sure that there aren't too many black holes or too many red flags that it's going to be impossible to sell the thing onto the next person. And it's a bit of a fine balance, that. And I think that the legal side actually has a significant impact in which camp you fall in, doesn't it?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
And if you so before we wrap up, one final question. What would your advice be to somebody who is looking to systematize their process for diligence and acquisition of new catalogs at higher volume? What would that be? What would be your recommendation? First thing to
I
do
think
next.
first thing to do next is adopt this idea of a pre-assessment rather than a post-deal assessment, and make it a genuine gate, maybe 2 or 3 pages, what rights, what encumbrances, what consent, what documents, what issues, all of those things being built into the tolerances and before the model, and most importantly, before you've done a letter of intent. People can say it's binding or non-binding, but human beings anchor on those prices. And then that opportunity to be able to then realize that if you measure and cycle the time and retrade it, I think you'll see the difference inside a quarter. And, it's that whole sporting analogy. If you make the first 10 yards more disciplined, then you don't have to the 10 yards be heroic and limp over the line.
Yeah, I like that. Cliff, this has been amazing. We've really covered a lot of ground here over these 2 episodes. And I just want to do a very, very quick recap. I will try to condense it down into a couple of sentences, which will obviously mean I miss a lot of the detail. If you want the detail, please go back and listen to the episodes. But I think the key pieces of advice are, if you're a seller, make sure that you are well educated ahead of going to market. Make sure that you've consulted somebody. Make sure you're aware of the expectations that will be placed on you. Make sure you know what you need before going to market. And that way you're going to have better matched expectations with the buyers. And there should be less shocks, which will mean a smoother, slicker, and hopefully happier process. And importantly, a completed process. And then on the other side, if you're a fund acquiring catalogs on a regular basis, try to systematize the process, try to create a structure that will allow you to go through these deals regularly, repeatedly, and as quickly as possible so you can get down to the nitty gritty without kind of getting stuck in the weeds. Is there anything else that you would add, Cliff?
Oh, well, apart from hiring the right lawyer, hashtag ad.
Hire the right lawyer. Yes, hint, hint. Amazing.
Couldn't
Cliff,
possibly
thank you
say.
so much. Cliff, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you next time on the next Music Fastball.
Thank you.